Hello and welcome to the Odyssey Academy, your virtual guide to the Odyssey of the Mind School program. This series of videos was designed to help introduce new students, new parents, new coaches to the Odyssey of the Mind School program. Yet, if you've already done Odyssey of the Mind 1 year or a couple of years, hopefully you can learn something new as well. The goal of the program is to help new students, new teams, understand what the Odyssey of the Mind School program is all about, how to start a long-term problem and solve a long-term problem. If you don't yet know what that word means, when I say long-term problem, what that term is, don't worry about it, because as part of this series of videos, we're going to teach you what long-term problem means and all the other vernacular for Odyssey of the Mind. So that'll become second nature for you as you learn the program. So let's go ahead and get started. This very first lesson is pretty straightforward. We're just going to introduce OM, or Odyssey of the Mind, right? So we like to call Odyssey of the Mind OM in the program. And as you become familiar with Odyssey of the Mind, I bet you too will start calling it OM. So on today's agenda, what we're going to do is talk about what OM is as a school program. We'll talk about what divergent thinking is, which is sort of the underlying philosophy of the OM school program. We'll talk about STEAM education. You're probably familiar with that. Maybe you've heard it before, but Odyssey of the Mind has been doing STEAM education for well over 40 years. So we were kind of ahead of the curve on that. We'll talk about who else does OM around the United States and also the world. It's a global program. And then the big part is talking about the three components or the three parts of Odyssey of the Mind. So we'll get there. And then finally, we'll end this particular lesson with what this class, what the Odyssey Academy will do for you as a student, or you as a parent, you as a coach, or you as somebody looking to bring Odyssey of the Mind to your local school. So let's go ahead and get started with the very first question, which is, what is OM? So Odyssey of the Mind, or OM as we like to call it, is an educational creative problem-solving program for students K through 12 and also universities. So there are university students that participate in Odyssey of the Mind as well. I have referred to it as a school program, but you should know that other groups that aren't school programs, like the Girl Scouts or community organizations or homeschool programs, have also and can also compete in Odyssey of the Mind. So it started more as a school program, but it's opened itself up so that students of all types, young kids of all types, can actually participate in the program, even if not through a school extracurricular. The way it works is teams will form of students, up to 7 students actually on a team. However, you can also decide to solve the problems on your own. So if that's something you choose to do, you can certainly do it. We have finalists at World Finals every year that are single students who have decided to solve the OM problem that year or an OM problem that year and compete. But 99% of the time, you're joining a team of up to 7 other students that will work with you to solve the problem in OM. What you'll do is, when I say solve a problem, you'll solve what we call a long-term problem. Now, we're going to dedicate an entire lesson to what a long-term problem is coming up in the future. Just know right now that the long-term problem is the heart of the OM program. It's what students spend weeks to months working on in terms of solving some creative open-ended problem where they can display their innovation and their ideas in a really fun, compelling way. So then what you'll do once you solve the problem is you'll present your solution at a competition. Now, you don't have to compete if you participate in OM, but most teams do. And competitions take place at the local regional level, if there are a lot of teams nearby, and then you advance to the state or association level. And then if you win at the state level, you get to advance to what's called the World Finals. And that's where teams from all over the world, from 30 different countries, come to the United States and share their solutions. So it's kind of cool to watch all these teams from around the world share different solutions to the same problem. And you get to meet a lot of cool new friends from around the globe. One point I want to make here with Odyssey of the Mind is OM is more than just a destination, right? Odyssey is called Odyssey of the Mind because we know that the journey is what matters. So while it's nice to go to competition and maybe you win a trophy or a prize of some kind, that's great. We love when teams do that. The real highlight for those of us helping volunteer to run the program is watching the students grow, watching them acquire teamwork skills, social skills, self-confidence skills, taking their ideas from their brain and making it a reality. These are important life skills that we teach in the program. It's just that we have a lot of fun while we're doing it. So that's the gist of the Odyssey of the Mind School program. If I had to summarize it more succinctly, I would just say it's an extracurricular activity that supplements or complements traditional classroom education. And here's the cool part. If you think of all the other clubs that students can be a part of, whether it's drama club, engineering club, math team, debate, any of these things, Odyssey of the Mind is sort of all of these clubs rolled up into one organization. Because in Odyssey of the Mind, you're going to be doing artistic things. You're going to be debating your ideas with your team members. You're going to be performing your ideas. You have to check in on history and the classics problem. So there's all sorts of ways that everything that we know and love about extracurricular activities get rolled up into one in the OM School program. I know, as somebody who participated in the program for 10 years and who did all these other organizations you can see on your screen, to me, Odyssey of the Mind was the most influential in my life just because it was so comprehensive and it requires the students, so me at the time, to do all of the work, right? Mom and dad, parents, coaches, you can't help. Like the kids have to do all the work. So whereas other programs at school, like drama, had a director who were, telling students what to do, this, you are the director, right? In debate club, where you had your debate advisor who would help you find your points and make your argument, and Odyssey of the Mind, you're the debate coach, right? So in this sense, it really forces the students to gain self-confidence, to know where their limitations are, know where their strengths are, to work together as a team to produce a really high quality solution. So OM is pretty special in that regard because it's so comprehensive and includes so much in one school program. All right, so moving on, Odyssey of the Mind promotes this notion of divergent thinking. So what is divergent thinking? That's a big word, especially if you're a young elementary school student watching this. What does it mean to be a divergent thinker? Well, let's talk about this. So the philosophy of Odyssey of the Mind, the philosophy of divergent thinking is there's no one right solution to a problem. So I'll repeat that. Divergent thinking is the belief that there is no one right solution to a problem. Now, you want to contrast this with convergent thinking. So if you have divergent thinking over here and convergent thinking over here, these two different things. Convergent thinking is when a problem has one correct answer. Everybody agrees that's the one correct answer. That's convergent thinking. So an example of a convergent problem would be, what is 1 + 1? Hopefully, if our mathematicians have done their jobs, the answer is 2, right? Now, we can try to be creative and come up with different ways 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2, but by and large, the standard acceptance is that 1 + 1 = 2. There's a convergent, correct response to that, right? If we were to say, what year did Columbus sail the ocean blue? The convergent response would be 1492, as the rhyme goes. So convergent thinking really hones in on a specific single accurate point, whereas divergent thinking thinks, there's any number of possible solutions to solve this problem. So let's illustrate this with an example. So if I ask you the question, how could you cross a small pond? Probably the first thing that comes to mind, as for most people, would be a little rowboat, right? So the answer here is, of course, just get in a boat and row across the pond. That is great, and that is a convergent answer. We'd probably all converge on this idea that using a rowboat to cross a pond is a good idea. But Odyssey of the Mind is a little bit different. It's teaching divergent thinking, right? So let's think of other ways we wouldn't normally just assume or jump to right away that we could use to cross a pond, different solutions for this. So in this case, maybe we use helium balloons to raise some device across the pond. Maybe we freeze the pond and then skate across it on ice skates, right? Maybe we build a bridge to cross the pond, which is, of course, what humans do. Maybe we make a rope swing that allows us to swing across the pond like Tarzan. Any of these solutions would also get us across the pond, but they weren't the first one probably that came to mind. So the idea in Odyssey of the Mind in the OM program is we want to teach young minds to think divergently. Of course, it's great that they can converge on a right answer, but we want them to think of all the possible right answers because this helps teach innovation and helps them create new things, which is important. All right. Moving on, so STEAM education has been a buzzword in education for the past decade at least. The cool thing is Odyssey of the Mind has been doing STEAM education for about 40 years, so a lot longer than STEAM has been in fashion. Now, in school, in traditional school, you know your subjects, reading, writing, arithmetic. There's also some science in there, some history in there, and all of those are great. Odyssey of the Mind is meant to build on top of what students are learning in their traditional classroom. So what does that mean? Well, it means things like learning how to be creative, learning creativity. What does creativity even mean? We're going to talk about that in a future lesson. What is teamwork? How do I work well in a team? How is it when other people have good ideas that are just as good as my own, can we come together to figure out which solution we should actually move forward with, right? Innovation, making your ideas real, from going from your mind to an actual tangible reality. And if we pause and think about this, when we become adults, for many of you that might be several years from now, for some of us it's already happened, you have to use these skills in the workplace every day. It doesn't mean you're not using math or reading. Of course you are, right? But you're also trying to be innovative. You're trying to come up with creative solutions when there's a budget or a time constraint. You have to work with a team almost always, right? There are very few jobs in this world where we don't work together with other people. So what we're trying to do in OM is teach these fundamental life skills that are going to have a profound impact on the future of Odyssey of the Mind participants. So STEAM, in case you're unfamiliar, stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Arts, and Mathematics. And as I said, what's very cool about the OM program is it's literally a hands-on program that gets students using and applying science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, right? So if they're building a structure that holds weight, a balsa structure that holds weight, they're talking about architecture and measuring and the science behind weight-bearing loads, things like this. If they're in classics and they're looking into history to understand how mythology can be updated or tells the stories of today, well, they're using their skills in the arts, and maybe they're building a technological device that goes along and demonstrates that myth in a super innovative way. So whatever problem students choose to solve, and we'll get to those in a second, they are using the STEAM skills that are so valuable, that we know are so valuable, in addition to skills like teamwork and creativity that will serve them very well in their career. All right, so who else does Odyssey of the Mind? It turns out a lot of people do. So OM is in just about every state in the United States. It started in New Jersey in 1978, where Dr. Sam Miklas, a professor there at the time at Rowan University, had his students engage in creative challenges and realized this opportunity to teach divergent thinking to his students, and of course then to expand that program beyond, seeing how much value it brought to students. The great thing is Dr. Sam is still involved in the program, and his son actually writes the problems that we solve today. So it's still very family-centric. In fact, we often refer to the OM family, which includes not just the Miklas family, but everyone around the world who participates. It's a very familial organization. So in addition to having people throughout the United States, Odyssey of the Mind is also a program in well over 30 countries. So you have teams in Germany and China and Japan and Russia, all over the world. And what's so cool is at the World Finals, you get to meet these students from all around the world, right? So you get to hang out with them on campus, you get to go watch their solutions, and it's so cool to watch other teams solving the problem, sometimes in their own native language, but having a different perspective on a solution, which kind of fosters this idea of global cooperation and everyone working together for the betterment of mankind, which is maybe a little soft, but I think it's a pretty cool experience. Plus, how fun is it to have friends around the world when you get to start traveling at some point? All right, so what do you actually do in OM? This is a pretty important question. There are three core components of the Odyssey of the Mind program, right? So repeat that. There are three core components of Odyssey of the Mind. So the first component is what we call the long-term problem. All right, and I have these point totals here. I'll explain them in a second. So the long-term problem is the meat, the heart of the Odyssey of the Mind program, and I'll describe it in a bit more detail in just a second. So that's part one. Part two is something we refer to as style. And you'll notice that the style box is overlapping the long-term box. And the reason for that is that these are presented at the same time. When teams present their solution, style and long-term are kind of part of the same component, but they're treated a little bit differently, right? So if that sounds confusing, don't worry. Just know that there's long-term and there's this thing called style. And we'll talk more in detail about that in just a second. The third component is spontaneous. So long-term, style, spontaneous. That's it. Those are the three things in Odyssey of the Mind. I'm going to describe each one of these separately in a moment, but just know, if anyone ever asks you, what are the three parts of OM? Long-term, style, spontaneous. Those are the three. Now, the point total here is if you were to compete in Odyssey of the Mind, of course you get scored. There are judges. We'll talk about competition in a later lesson, but the total possible points you can get each year is 350 points. And the point breakdown is presented here, right? So the long-term problem is where the bulk of your points will be. That is 200 total points. Style is an additional 50 points, and spontaneous is an additional 100 points. So when you're thinking about competition, and again, we'll go into competition detail in a later lesson, just know that you have 350 points you're going for, and this is how they break down. So let's talk about each component separately. So the long-term problem, as I've said throughout, is the heart of the OM program. Teams are going to spend weeks to months solving their long-term problem, and the long-term problem can be anything under the sun, right? So one year, I remember we had to take a Shakespearean story and update it to a modern time period, right? Another year, we had to take a story from a list of famous stories and turn it into a musical full of choreography and original music, right? Some years, you have to build vehicles that complete different tasks without the team members touching the vehicle. So The problems vary from year to year. The one thing that stays the same are the problem categories. So what I've had listed here, or what I have listed here, are the 6 problem categories. So problem 1 is always vehicular, problem 2 is always technical, problem 3 is always classical, problem 4 is always structural, problem 5 is always theatrical, and problem 6 is always the primary problem. So what do I mean when I say that problem 1 is the vehicular problem? What it means is that the teams every year in problem 1 will be creating a vehicle of some sort. Now, what that vehicle looks like or what's required changes from year to year. So the specifics of the long-term problem changes each year. One year, the vehicle problem might require that the team members ride on the vehicle and complete tasks. Another year, it might be that the team has to build 3 small vehicles that do something on an obstacle course. So regardless, every year, problem 1 has something to do with transportation and vehicles. And same thing, problem 2 every year has something to do with building a technological device of some kind, right? More of a very engineering slant to the problem. What the specifics are, changes year to year. Classics, same thing, always incorporate something from history, right? So maybe it's about civilization, maybe it's about famous people from history, maybe it's about famous works of art. Any of those things are the source material for the classics problem, but the specifics of the classic problem change year after year. Now, I want to point out that problem 6, or category 6, primary, is only open for kindergarten through 2nd grade students. And the idea for the primary problem is it's an entree, it's an entry into OM, so that young students learn the ropes of the program, kind of how it works. They can come to competition and perform. They're not scored, right? They get feedback, but they're not in the competition, so to speak, just so that they have an understanding of how OM works. So then that way, when they're old enough, they can start competing in the other 5 problems. And I want to point out and highlight here, teams only solve one problem. So if you're panicking a bit, thinking, oh my gosh, I have to build a vehicle, I have to write a classical skit. No, you have to only choose one problem, right? So maybe this year you do vehicle and you design and build vehicles. Maybe next year you decide to do classics and you perform a lovely musical that's based on a biography of someone from the past. The idea here is that you're only choosing one problem. You're not solving all of these 6 problems that are presented here, right? This is for illustration. Cool. So that's that. You can see teams performing their solution here. We'll talk more about what the actual solution, how it works, what it looks like, and what you're expected to do in a later lesson. All right, moving on. So we have long-term. Now we have style. So what is style? Now remember, I said style is related to long-term, but it's a little different. Now I'll explain why there might be some confusion. So the long-term problem is going to require the teams to do certain tasks within set limitations. And we're going to talk specifically about long-term in its own lesson. Style is, in addition to what the long-term problem is asking, what do we as a team want to do to make our own unique mark on our solution? All right, so it's completely separate from the sense that if we're being scored for 10 things in long-term, we're not going to be scored on those things for style. We're going to choose our own things, our own new costumes or performances or backdrops or technological devices. We are going to make those and choose to have those scored as style. And in doing so, we're going to create a unique sort of stamp that we're putting on our long-term solution. So that's what style means. If it's confusing right now, trust me, it's confusing even for teams that have been doing OM for a while. The good news is I have a whole lesson just on style in a later lesson. So we will talk in more detail about what style is. Just know, again, it allows teams to create their own unique stamp and do their own fun things that aren't required in the long-term problem as part of their solution. All right, and the last piece here, there's a style example. The last piece here is spontaneous. So spontaneous, unlike long-term and style, in which teams have weeks to months to solve, spontaneous is a surprise problem. So literally, the day of competition, teams will walk into a room and be given a problem to solve. Don't know what it is, have no advance warning. They'll be given a couple of minutes to think or to plan their solution, and then a couple minutes to perform or execute that solution. We'll talk again in detail about spontaneous and the types of problems that exist. There's a whole lesson dedicated to spontaneous, but just know that the purpose of the spontaneous portion of Odyssey of the Mind is to test things like quick thinking skills, teamwork, creative problem solving, all these skills that team members have developed over the weeks and months of participating in the program. They get to put on full display in spontaneous. It's an improviser's dream, right? So spontaneous, you can see some students here working on a hands-on spontaneous problem. And again, when we talk about spontaneous in the spontaneous lesson, we'll talk about the specific problem types and how to practice and prepare for spontaneous. All right, so what is this course going to do? What is Odyssey Academy going to do, and what is participating in OM going to do for you, the student or parent, your child, teacher, your students? What it's going to do is going to teach you to be more creative, right? We're going to have a whole lesson on what creativity is, some tools you can use to come up with creative ideas. All of that will be covered in this program. You're going to learn how to brainstorm ideas, what brainstorming is, the best ways to brainstorm according to science. You're going to learn how to write a skit. So we're going to teach you some tools when it comes to performance-based skills that will help you as you're developing your own Odyssey of the Mind solution. You're going to learn how to be funny on stage. So believe it or not, we'll teach you how to be funny based on comedy tools that we know have worked for a long, long time. You will select and solve an OM problem. Ooh, sounds exciting, doesn't it, right? So what you'll do is you'll go to this year's current set of problems at the Odyssey of the Mind homepage. You're going to read through them, and you get to decide which problem you want to solve for this academic year, and then you're going to solve it. You're going to turn your ideas into reality. So after you've done your brainstorming, your creative idea generation, you're actually going to make these things happen, right? You're going to build your own costumes, your own backdrops, your own props, and you're going to perform your solution. That's the goal. And then finally, if you really want to, you'll compete. You don't have to compete, right? You can still do OM, go through the whole process and enjoy it and have fun and learn a lot of great things. But we encourage our students to go to competition because you learn a lot by going to watch other teams perform. You learn about teamwork, good sportsmanship. You learn how the same problem can have a number of different solutions that are also just as effective. So there's a lot of learning involved in going to competition as well, and it'll make you a better OM participant going forward in the future as you see other teams share their ideas. All right, so just so you know how the class will work, we'll always do this little checklist at the end to know exactly what we've accomplished in that lesson. These are all the objectives we have over the course of 15 videos. So today, we got to know what OM is. So that's what we covered today. As a little preview, we're going to talk about what's expected of you, understanding what a long-term problem is in the nearer lessons, and near the end, we're going to talk about reflecting on your Odyssey journey, what competition is like. Those will be lessons 14 and 15. And finally, the last thing we'll do every lesson is a little progress report where I highlight the key takeaways from that particular lesson. So number one, do you understand what OM is? Do you understand what the program's all about, the philosophy? Do you, number two, understand what divergent thinking is? How is divergent thinking different from convergent thinking? And how do we use and promote divergent thinking in OM? And then number three, do you know the three parts of OM? All right, long term, got that one. Style, and there's one more, spontaneous, right? So those are the three components of OM. Each is going to get its own lesson in the future where you're going to do a deep dive to understand how those components work. And as I said, if you participate in these videos from lesson 1 to lesson 15 and work simultaneously on solving your OM problem, you'll get from point A to point B and be ready to compete if you want when that time comes. So I hope you're ready for this Odyssey because I'm excited to take you on it, and I will see you in lesson 2.